I love the land of 10,000 hills. Everything's up and down. There's very little flat. And really to fly over it is a beauty to behold, particularly all of the terraced areas where there's farming up the hills, and whether it's tea or it's bananas or all of the different things. I absolutely love this country. It's a gorgeous country from its physical beauty, but it's also just a gorgeous country because of the people. And I love the people here. I love the people here because pain has a way of deepening us. And when what happened in 1994, in the genocide of the Tutsis, that left an entire nation in shock. This wasn't a traumatized subgroup. The entire nation was traumatized with a loss of over 1 million lives in about 100 days. How do you deal coming out of the rubble? As Bishop John Rusciano would say, how do you preach hope standing on the bones of the past? The trauma, even though many today weren't alive when the genocide happened, still it is generational. There's generational trauma. But pain has a way of deepening you if you will let it. Pain doesn't always bring good out of people. And for instance, when my youngest son died 6 years ago, he struggled with mental illness his entire life. And when he took his life, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't preach, I didn't teach, and for 16 weeks I pretty much spent 12 hours a day alone with God. But when I did decide to resume my ministry after this really severe grief, the first place I came to was to Rwanda. And the reason why is I knew Rwandans understood pain. I was first invited by the president. He came to America to meet a friend of mine, Joe Ritchie, and while he was visiting Joe in his home in the Chicago area, he happened to see a copy of my book, The Purpose-Driven Life. And President Kagame looked at that title and he said, I'd be interested in reading that book. I'm a man of purpose, and I'd like to read the book. And Joe said, well, why don't you take it? It's Rick Warren's book, and not only that, you ought to meet him, because I think he would be interested in helping in the rebuilding of Rwanda. Well, about 3 months later, I got a letter from the president of Kagame, the president of Rwanda, and he said, I invite you to come help us rebuild a nation on purpose. We are recovering from a genocide, and we want to be a purpose-driven nation. And I told him that while I'm as a pastor, I work with primarily churches, but I do work with leadership in business and leadership in government. And we call this the 3 legs of the stool. That to have a healthy organization, healthy society or a healthy nation, it takes 3 sectors, not 2, not 1. There's the public sector, that's government and NGOs. There's the private sector, that's business and for-profit agencies. And then there's the faith sector, that's churches and houses of worship. If you have a 1-legged stool, it will fall over. If you have a 2-legged stool, it will fall over. There are 3 legs. You must have stability, and to have a stable nation, then you need to bring everybody to the table. And I told this to President Kagame, and he said we learned pretty early after the genocide that we could recover faster if we engaged all 3 sectors: the business sector, the church sector, and the government sector. Now, we don't tell the government what to do. We don't tell business what to do. The government and business don't tell churches what to do, and neither the church or the government tell businesses what to do. Everybody has a different role to play, but together, we're better together, and it becomes stability to build the basis of success on. Saddleback now has been coming to Rwanda to serve the churches and to serve the businesses and to help in any way that we could with the government and business and the 3 sectors of society. We've now been coming for 15 years, and over 3,000 members of my church have served in Rwanda. Judges have come, federal judges have come and helped train judges, and police have come and helped train police. Teachers have come and helped train teachers. We sent over 120 nurses, have come and trained nurses. Of course, pastors have trained pastors, and farmers have trained farmers, and entrepreneurs have come to help show new entrepreneur techniques. And so we don't do stuff for people. We come and help people, enable them to do what they already could do if they have opportunity and they have training. And that's been very exciting now to see over 15 years and see the fruit of that. Because we've had a long-term relationship with Rwanda, we've had a number of Rwandan events over the years. We have sponsored many Rwanda days where we bring in the diaspora. The people who are from Rwanda all over the United States will come to the West Coast. But then, of course, we have participated in both the commemoration of the genocide and the celebration of the ending of the genocide. We did Kwibuka 20 and then Kwibuka 25, which was the 25th anniversary of the starting of the genocide. And President Kagame came to our church for that. I interviewed him in a service, and you know, we want to talk about the lessons so it never happens again. It cannot happen again. Well, one of the big achievements, there are many different achievements. For instance, we now know, this is a United Nations statistic, that since the peace plan has been here, 1 million people have come out of poverty in Rwanda. Now, that's not the result of the peace plan by itself, but it's the responsibility of everybody working together. And we do our part, churches do their part, government does their part, business does their part. And to say that we now have 1 million people out of poverty that were there in poverty when the peace plan started, that's a big victory. Another big victory is the reduction of the number of orphans in this nation. The genocide left about 1 million orphans in a nation of about 10 million people at the time. So 1 out of every 10 people in this country was orphaned by the genocide. And when President Kagame asked us to help with the orphan issue, we said, well, we would be glad to come and help with the orphan issue as long as you realize that we aren't interested in building orphanages. You can never build enough orphanages. Kids deserve families, not orphanages. And so we began to, using the churches, systematically empty the orphanages in Rwanda and move them into adopted families, foster care families, support families, and different kinds of families, so that every child has parents that help them in their growth. That would make Rwanda the first nation in the world with no orphanage. And that's a statement to say that the kids have been brought into foster care or adopted care, things like that. That's another great victory. Rwanda is on a fast track. It's moving very, very fast. Years ago, I said to President Kagame that the model for Rwanda probably should not be the United States, but probably should be Singapore. Singapore is, for a long time, was the only nation that went from very poor nation to first world prosperity in 1 generation. I believe Rwanda is on track to do the same. That besides Singapore, it will be the second nation in history to go from being a developing country to actually being a developed country where issues like poverty and disease are going down every year, prosperity is going up every year, and actually moves into a tier of leadership nations that kind of bypasses the majority of nations in the world. There's no doubt about it that this is a leadership factory. I believe that the primary export of Rwanda should be leadership. Should be the kind of leaders that they're raising up and growing. And I see a whole new generation of leadership that can affect not just the continent of Africa, but around the world. Oh, of course, there are always critics. And the critics actually come from 4 different sources. And they all have the same common denominator. They're all jealous. They're all jealous of the prosperity and the success. They don't want Rwanda to succeed for the same different reasons. The first is the genociders who committed the genocide are still alive. They're living in other nations, and they don't want Rwanda as a free nation to succeed. They want to take it back over again. They want to be in charge. They lost power. And so they're jealous. So they have nothing good to say about the success of this nation because they were the ones that got kicked out because they were committing genocide. And the president has clearly said, you're welcome back if you lay down your arms and really work with us to help build a new nation. They outlawed the death penalty here in Rwanda. The Gacaca courts have allowed work service to be a punishment for participation. And so really every door has been opened. The hand of friendship has been extended of where we welcome you back if you come back as friends. But some people don't want to come back as friends. They want to come back to take over again. And so they're critical. Second group that's critical are the French, because France backed the wrong side. And they actually let the genociders get away. They have blood on their hands. And because France did not support the nation which was a Francophone country at that time. People were speaking French. And the United Nations doesn't really like Rwanda because it's succeeding without their help. And that makes them feel, well, you're supposed to need us. You're supposed to be dependent upon us. And yet the concept of self-reliance in Rwanda is so strong. It goes, you weren't here when we needed you in the genocide. Why would we need you in prosperity? No thank you, UN. And so they don't like to see a country progressing and being successful without being able to claim the credit for it. And then there's one other group that are critical of Rwanda, and it is actually people who have served here in the government but were caught in corruption. And when President Kagame and the government here has a zero tolerance for corruption. Doesn't matter who you are or where you've been or if you're a family member or anybody else. If you are corrupt, you're out. And having served on the President's Advisory Council now for 15 years, I have seen actually some people who actually got caught in their corruption. And what did they do? Well, when they lose their position and they lose their power, they move to South Africa and start writing critical commentaries and blogs criticizing, well, it was their fault. It was their critics, it was their mistakes that caused them to lose their favor in this nation. And I've said many times, I think Rwanda may be the only country I've ever been to where I've never been asked for a bribe. That says something about the people in this nation. We're going to build on integrity and on generosity and humility. And that's what I love about Rwanda. What I've learned about criticism is that no matter what you do or say, you're going to have critics. And I happen to know that President Kagame just pretty much ignores them, because you're not going to give it. If people don't want to like you, you're not going to make them like you. And no matter what you say, they have what I call motivated reasoning. They don't want to like you. And so I used to think if I could explain to people just the facts about Rwanda or anything else, then people would go, oh, that makes sense, and they would change their mind. But what happens if you show them that they're wrong, it just makes them more mad. And then they have to go find some other reason or make up a reason to hate you. Haters are going to hate. And what I know is that having had 3,000 of my own members on the ground in Rwanda, if things were as bad as the critics say, my people would have heard it. And they haven't, because it's just not true. And as I've traveled around Africa, this country is the envy of the continent. God bless you, my friends.